and every story can change the world. Together we are Global Speakers Talk.
Let me begin with a question. Have you ever reached a point where, you were winning and successful, but somehow you felt like you were losing yourself in the process? Where sometimes your leadership looks strong on the outside, but your energy, your relationships were quietly being depleted. Many leaders feel this way, but very few ever say it out loud. Now, most leaders never set out to really feel disconnected, not from their teams, not from their families, and definitely not from themselves. But somehow along the journey, success gets loud, expectations become heavy, and the very people who once felt driven start to feel tired, you know, misunderstood, and sometimes lonely at the top. After 25 years in banking and risk leadership, I discovered something very powerful. I realized that the greatest risks we face are not really financial in nature, they're human. And the most important assets we manage are not our careers, not our portfolios, not our KPIs, but is in our relationships. Now, a few years ago, I was at the peak of my corporate career. I was senior vice president, chief risk officer, a seat in the boardroom. I was a voice in the management. My professional life was doing great. But one day, life confronted me with a risk I was not prepared for. It was a few days before we went into lockdown. Pandemic um, happened. Pandemic risk response was under my shop. And one phone call from my sister-in-law in Canada changed everything for me. It was the day I learned that my daughter was silently struggling with depression, and I didn't see it. And that moment broke me, not because I was weak, but because for the first time I realized this truth. Leadership means nothing if the people you love feel unseen. But I'm a believer that when storms happen in your life, not all storms are meant to destroy you. Others are meant to clear your path. And that moment of awakening for me pushed me to understand emotional intelligence, human behavior. It led me from the highly technical risk management space to delving deep into personal development, becoming an NLP master practitioner, a bank personality coach. And eventually, all these learnings led me to create my life's bank framework. So the experience didn't just change my parenting, it changed the way I led teams, made decisions, connected with people. It changed the way I led my life. Because I believe the first mandate of leadership is to lead our lives well. And today I want to share with you three leadership lessons that transformed the way I lead every day. And these lessons can apply whether you're a CEO, a manager, a parent, a business owner, or someone leading yourself through a challenging season. The first lesson is emotional strength is not soft, it's actually strategic. You know, as many of the speakers said, leadership used to be about control, certainty, and authority. But in today's world, it demands something different of leaders: emotional awareness. Because let's be honest, people don't leave companies, they leave emotional climate. When you have a leader who avoids conflict, he loses influence. When you have a leader who reacts, you destroy psychological safety. But a leader who self regulates, that's a leader who inspires trust. Because emotional strength is a leadership skill. It shapes every decision, every conversation, every relationship. And I'm going to share with you now like one simple practice that you can do. Name the emotion before you respond to it. Because once you can name it, you can navigate the emotion. Now, the second lesson is that leadership without understanding people is not leadership at all. In the years I was in corporate and I've led teams, what I realized is that people are not difficult. People are simply different. Different personalities, different motivations, different values that show up in the way they work. And when leaders don't understand this, you have misunderstandings happening everywhere. And that is why when I discovered the bank personality system, I found it very powerful because it makes you see things through the lens of their values. And I realized that people show up, they communicate not just with words, but based on their values. The bank personality system stands for the blueprint, action, nurturing, knowledge, personality types. So if you look at the blueprints, they're the ones that want structure. Actions, meanwhile, want results. The nurturing types want connection, and the knowledge types want data and logic. So each of them correct in their own right, but looking at their different colored lenses. So imagine if you're leading a team without realizing that every person in the room is speaking a different language. That changes everything, isn't it? And this was a tool I wish I discovered early on in my career. It could have saved me a lot of energy, a lot of misunderstandings, a lot of conflict and argument. And so now this is something I share to companies, to business leaders, to empower them with the tool. Now, the third lesson is that success is a portfolio. So we have to learn to invest where it counts. To be a better leader, you have to recognize that your life is made of accounts. These are what I call your life bank accounts: leadership, impact, family, emotional strength, and social connections. And you need to make sure that each one is well funded so that you don't run on empty. Because I know of some leaders, they're brilliant at work, brilliant at what they do, but their family account is empty. They're emotionally strong, but their relationship overdrafted. You can have leaders who are technically good, but people hate them. So you may have influence based on fear, but that's not leadership at all. And as a leader, you don't really need balance because I believe there's no such thing as work-life balance. Just like your financial bank accounts, when you look at each one of them, it's never going to be a perfect balance down to the last cent. But you need to make sure they're well funded to help you go on. And in life, you need that alignment. So I ask you today, which of your life account needs a deposit? So make sure you constantly invest in it. Because leadership, is not just a title. Leadership is the way you show up. It's you. You in the rooms you walk into, in the conversations you have, and especially in the relationships that matter the most. And you can lead companies, teams, but if you lose yourself, it's not worth it. If you build success but you lose connections, it still is incomplete. So leadership starts inside of you long before you influence anyone outside of you. So today I hope you remember one thing: you invest where it counts. Because honestly, the world doesn't need more leaders with titles, it needs more leaders with humanity. So thank you.
Together we are global speakers talk.